Jesus chose rejects and losers and cheaters and people who were ignored and shunned. That's who he chose as his closest followers in his inner circle. Today we look at one of those guys, a guy no one expected to be a follower of Jesus. He was not just a follower, he became a leader and ultimately wrote a book of the Bible. If you consider yourself the worst person in the room, if you see yourself as a horrible sinner, if you have a string of failures and a list of shocking sins and faults, listen close, because you're going to discover that you are a perfect candidate for Jesus. We pick up the story in Mark chapter 2. Once again, Jesus went out beside the lake. A large crowd came to him. He began to teach. As he walked along, he saw Levi. Jesus later changed his name to Matthew, so for consistency, I'm just going to stick with Matthew. He saw Matthew sitting at the tax collector's booth. The Romans were an occupying force, hated by the Jews. Matthew was a Jew working for the Roman government's equivalent of the IRS. As a tax collector working for the Romans, Matthew was taking money from his own people to line the pockets of the enemy. Tax collectors were hated because the Romans taxed virtually everything. And this may shock some of you. Some people don't like to pay taxes. It's true. In this case, there was a ground tax, which was a tariff on crop growers. 1/10 of all the grain, 1/5 of all the wine went to the Romans. There were occupational taxes. If you were a fisherman, you paid tax based on how many fish you caught. If you were in the transportation industry, you paid a cart tax, the charge for each wheel on your cart. There were road taxes, bridge taxes, import taxes. There was even a tax for simply breathing Roman air. On top of all that, each citizen paid a 10% income tax. In the U.S., 37% is the top income tax bracket. The typical Jew paid 50% or more. Tax collectors paid Rome, but then they could keep the rest of the money. So the system was corrupt. The rich bribed the tax collectors to avoid paying taxes. The middle class and poor made more than their share. Tax collectors were hated and shunned. In fact, they were so hated that they weren't even allowed in the temple. They weren't allowed in church. They were viewed the way we view people who scam senior citizens. We have a tendency to evaluate people based on how they dress, how they look, what they do, and we decide whether or not they're good candidates for Jesus, and then we apply our standards, assume God does the same. Once again, Jesus demonstrated otherwise. He walked up to Matthew's tax collector's booth and said 2 words, "Follow me." And the most stunning thing happened. Matthew got up and followed him. We don't know. We assume that Matthew had heard of Jesus. Maybe he'd overheard a message. Maybe he'd heard people talk about being healed. But he must have been surprised when Jesus came and asked him to follow, because he and Jesus were incredibly different. People loved and admired Jesus. He had followers. People hated Matthew. His only friends were people just like him. They thought Jesus was the salt of the earth. Matthew was the scum of the earth. Jesus freely gave. Matthew always took. Jesus healed people. Matthew crippled people financially, emotionally. Jesus was the Messiah. Matthew was the menace. They couldn't be further apart. According to religious experts, Jesus should have avoided Matthew. He shouldn't be seen with people like that. Instead, he walked up, no introduction, no big speech. He just said, "Follow me." Jesus didn't say, "Follow me, but first, tell me why you cheated all those people." Follow me, but before you do, you got to fix all that stuff. Follow me if you can live right. Jesus simply spoke 2 life-changing words. Follow me. And maybe Matthew had been thinking about his life and about his future. Maybe his soul felt empty, even though his wallet was full. Whatever the reason, Matthew's dramatic decision to leave the past and follow Jesus was immediate. The simple command, "Follow me," was enough for the man with the empty soul to change his life. Deep inside, Matthew must have known Jesus' love and forgiveness were what he needed. It was the appeal of love that drove Matthew's decision. Matthew left his tax collection booth, abandoned his business. He willingly traded his business, his money, and his stuff to follow Jesus. I think it's important to note Matthew left. Matthew understood. If you want to follow Jesus and realize his plan for your life, you have to be willing to leave some things behind. Following Jesus requires leaving things behind. When you make the decision to follow Jesus, there are some things, maybe even some people you have to leave behind. You might have to leave your old cell phone number behind because people associated with your old life keep trying to pull you back to it. You might need to leave some unhealthy relationships behind. You might need to leave some life-controlling habits behind. And I know what you're thinking. I knew it was too good to be true. I knew eventually it would come and he would give us the list of rules, what he thinks we have to do. I knew it was coming. As soon as they turn the lights down, we're out of here. Well, you're wrong. I don't have a list of rules for you. You don't have to dress like me or mark things off some checklist I've made. Unfortunately, too many churches fall into that trap. If you want to be part of our church, you have to follow our rules. That's required for our acceptance. That's required for God's acceptance. You have to obey the rules. Well, this is not about me telling you the rules. God's love produces obedience faster than any list of rules. Here's the principle. Genuine love generates genuine submission. Someone genuinely in love with Jesus follows his commands. When it comes to tithing, give the first 10%. Someone genuinely in love with Jesus, that's not even an issue. God's love leads people to change. It's kind of like when you fell in love for the first time. All of a sudden, you want to change. She didn't ask you to. She didn't give you a list of guidelines that you had to do to qualify for her love. You started making changes. You took a shower. You might have washed your hair every day. You bought and used deodorant, even cologne. Depending on your generation, you might have gone down to the drugstore and bought a big bottle of Old Spice because you saw that commercial and you poured it all over yourself because everyone knows if a little is good, a lot's better. You started watching silly romantic movies just to be with her. You dressed different. You left some friends behind who were the wrong influence. She didn't have to ask or demand it. You changed any and everything because you were in love. After our first date, I sent Cindy flowers. Purple's my favorite color. There was one purple flower among the others. And from then on, till we got married, I always had new flowers delivered before the last ones died. And every arrangement had one purple flower. That was 1986. Things were cheaper. Right? Gas was 86 cents a gallon. In spite of that, on my best or worst, depending on how you look at it, month, I spent 1 month $550 on flowers. I spent $4,000 on flowers that year, to which you say, you're a fool. Maybe so, but I was in love, and I got the girl, and you didn't. And I was living at home, and I had no bills, and my mom and dad were paying for the gas. See, you've been wondering, well, what will I have to give up if I accept Jesus? What do I have to change? You've missed a key point. Obedience is a response to love, not the result of harsh rules. You'll want to change. You'll want to give up some things and leave some things behind. That's what happens when you discover the unconditional love of Jesus. And now the setting changes from Matthew's tax collector's booth to Matthew's dining room. Well, Jesus is having dinner at Matthew's house. Many tax collectors and sinners were eating with him and his disciples, for there are many who followed him. Matthew made a life-altering choice to follow Jesus. Then he made another choice. Matthew had a dinner at his house, and he invited his old friends, tax collectors and sinners, to meet his new friend, Jesus. Matthew responded to Jesus' love by loving others. He decided, if Jesus can love me, I bet he can love my friends. So he threw a party, and he gave his friends the chance to meet Jesus personally. Matthew intentionally introduced his friends to the one who changed his life. And I wonder, are you intentionally inviting your friends at school or at work or in your neighborhood or in your family to meet Jesus? Or you're just hoping they'll somehow bump into him along the way and someone else will introduce him? Has Jesus changed you to the point that you can't imagine your friends not knowing him? It should be natural. If Jesus is master of your life and your number one friend, it shouldn't take long for you to get Jesus and your friends in the same room. In this case, they're in the middle of the room, surrounded by lowlife and losers. The kind of people you weren't supposed to associate was Jesus. Jesus sat with them. They had food and conversation. And the religious authorities watching were horrified. How could he? What's he thinking? What kind of leader hangs out with those kind of people? What about the rules? The religious leaders of the day, the Pharisees, were not trained to see potential. Instead, they saw potential problems. They were not impressed Jesus was eating with this group. To eat with tax collectors and sinners was wrong. So they spoke up, but not to Jesus. Like most critics, the Pharisees found someone else to tell. You don't go to the source, you just go to other people. The Pharisees cornered the disciples and they said, why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners? Outreach often results in criticism. If you want to avoid criticism, spend all your time with Christians. Avoid the loss at any cost. For a church to avoid criticism, spend all your time and money keeping Christians happy and content. Give them everything their heart desires. And it's hard to believe, but many churches end up in major conflict over this issue. A leader or leadership group wants to reach out to the lost, and that is seen as inappropriate by another group that doesn't want their church to change. They don't want to dirty their hands by spending time with sinners, regardless of what Jesus did. Outreach or bridge events attract criticism. If you have a giveaway, you're accused of bribing people to come to church. You may have watched that Forever Free video a few moments ago, and they said, big giveaways if you come Tuesday night. And you thought, well, they are bribing people to come to church. And? When they do something in a service designed to build a bridge to sinners, more criticism. I thank God for our church. I thank God for your heart for the lost. You've adopted the priority of Jesus, and you understand that to criticize attempts to reach the lost is to place yourself in opposition to the mission of Jesus. Yeah. We've got a culture that's built on reaching out to others. We have to fight to keep that culture. We must choose daily to sacrifice our preferences to make a way for lost and hurting people to meet the one who can make them healed and complete and whole. And when we do that, we become more like Jesus. Pharisees cornered the disciples in private, but in this case, the conversation quickly became public. Jesus overheard, and he countered their criticism with an observation. Jesus said to them, well, It's not the healthy who need a doctor. It's the sick. We can identify with that. You go to the doctor when you're sick. Not when you don't like call the doctor's office and say, well, I want to make an appointment. Well, what's going on? I just want to chat. I want to tell him how good I'm feeling. I don't have a stomach ache this week. I don't have a fever. Haven't had COVID in months. I just wanted to come by and give him a couple $100 and thank him. No, you go to the doctor when you're sick, and you know what you see at the doctor? Yeah, other sick people. You sit in the waiting room and you look around and you try to figure out, wonder what she's got. Ooh, he's hacking. I don't want to sit next to him. I'm going to leave more sick than I came. You understand, naturally, it's sick people that go to the doctor. Jesus is saying it. It's not the healthy you need a doctor, but the sick. And then he made the comparison. I've not come to call the righteous, but sinners. The Pharisees watching that night were expert sinner spotters. They loved to point a finger at people and declare what was wrong, but offer no help. The God they claimed to follow wouldn't accept people like Matthew and his friends. They avoided those kind of people. Their hardened hearts and narrow religious views had no room for mercy. Jesus acknowledged that Matthew and his friends were sinners, but Jesus' agenda always puts lost people first. And if that was Jesus' agenda, shouldn't that be our agenda? Our response to the love of Jesus should be to share that love with others. Every once in a while, somebody asks me, well, Pastor Rod, what if those kind of people come to church? I mean, I understand. I've been watching the news. I read stuff. They're out there. What if they come to church? What are we going to do? Are you going to allow them? Are you just going to let them come? We're not only going to allow them to attend, we're going to welcome them and invite them and love them and introduce them to Jesus. Jesus loved people, and he extended his mercy towards all. Jesus saw something in the party crowd that no one else saw. Jesus saw people in spiritual need and called them spiritually sick. He embraced them in order to cure the sickness. Isn't Jesus awesome? If you're spiritually needy and you don't know where to turn, Jesus embraces you with your faults and failures and doubts and weaknesses. He's not avoiding you, he's inviting you. This story is a picture of Jesus and his love for all people. Jesus demonstrated the power of love. Matthew experienced it, responded, and then shared it. The same Jesus who met Matthew sees your potential and extends his love to you. He loves you. God sees clearly into your life. He knows everything about you. He knows your past failures. He knows your current doubts. His love for you is not naive. He sees you for what you are. He knows how you felt this morning. He knows what you did 20 years ago. His love for you isn't because of how you act or think or feel. God loves you in spite of that. You don't have to be a good person to qualify because God's love is based on his nature, not your nature. Most career specialists would have told Jesus, don't choose a guy like Matthew. He's too big a risk. He could ruin your reputation. He could ruin your ministry. You need to load your team with winners. But Jesus saw beyond the obvious to the potential. The Pharisees saw Matthew as crooked and corrupt, as hopelessly flawed. Jesus saw more than what Matthew was. He saw what Matthew could become. And Jesus changed his name from Levi to Matthew. And do you know what Matthew means? Matthew means gift of God. How could Jesus name a tax collector gift of God? Because Jesus was seeing into the future. Matthew, who was a hated tax collector, became a trusted friend and the writer of one of the four Gospels. It was against all odds. Love sees potential. The odds didn't matter with Matthew, and the odds don't matter with you. The world attaches labels. You may even accept those labels: loser, cheat, addict, liar, worthless. God looks at you and sees beyond the flaws to the potential. You are not a mistake. When God looks at you, he sees the finished product, not the current condition. He sees not only what you are, but what you can and what you will be. There's a really cool app I want to show you. It's called Brickit. If your kid loves Legos, or maybe you love Legos, you just got to see this. If Legos have been in your family, what they do, I mean, as I was a kid, you just bought Legos. Now you don't. You buy sets where you can make stuff. Like you can make a Star Wars something cruiser. I don't know. I haven't seen it. But you probably have tubs of Legos like these sitting around the house, and you can't figure out what to do with it. Look at this big box of Legos. Can be overwhelming. And you wonder what could possibly come from it. Well, Brickit looks at these Lego pieces and sees potential. Here's how it works. You open the app, and then you take a picture of the Legos and it scans all the pieces. And when it's done scanning, it shows you all the potential things you can build from those Legos. You see an alcoholic, he sees what you can be and that you'll be set free from addiction. You think you're worthless, but God knows your future. He sees the great things you'll do. God sees your potential. He knows how amazing you're going to be. He doesn't see a loser. He sees someone who will introduce lost people to Jesus. The very worst person can become the person God uses the most. Remember, God took a lying, cheating tax collector and made him a Bible-writing disciple. God not only knows what you are, but he knows what you can become. And if God had a plan for Matthew, he has a plan for you. God sees you as precious and priceless, as a gift. He loves you. He has a plan and a purpose for you. He's going to use you in incredible ways. When others treat you as worthless, I want you to know you're a gift of God. Yeah. When someone tries to cut you down, you are a gift of God. When people call you names and make you feel small, you are a gift of God. When people don't believe in you, you are still a gift of God. I don't want you to ever forget that. You are a gift of God, and he has a plan and a purpose for you. And now I want to spin out of this story, and I want to go to the other application, the other side. If you're a follower of Jesus, here's the question for you. Are you like the Pharisees, constantly finding faults in others? Or are you like Jesus, looking for potential? See, I want to be a cheerleader for potential, not a critic of problems. You got enough people telling you what's wrong with you. I want to cheer for how God's going to use you. Now, are there some people it's hard to see potential in? Yes, but it's there. And our goal is to be like Jesus, which means seeing people through his eyes. What does that look like? Love sees a person honestly. Jesus saw Matthew collecting money from the Romans, for the Romans, keeping it for himself. Jesus knew what Matthew was like. He knew his corruption. He knew his reputation. He knew his past. Jesus knew Matthew completely and loved him anyway. Jesus knows you completely, and he still loves you. Now, loving people doesn't mean you turn your brain off. You can be aware of people's faults and failures and still choose to love and minister to them. You can be eyes open about those God leads you to and God leads to you. You can love people in spite of their faults. In fact, we must love people in spite of their faults. If we don't, we're not following the example of Jesus. One of the most exciting things happening at First NLR is prison ministry. We've taken our recovery ministry inside prisons and jails. Inmates watch the service online. They participate in process groups. The results have been incredible. At the Pulaski County Jail, we have 349 graduates. 349. At AAC, 156. At Hawkins Women Unit, 27 graduates. At Wrightsville, 31 graduates. We have new groups starting in Tucker Max and Randall Williams, several other prisons joining soon. We're going to jail. And here's what's really cool. When they get out of prison, they come to church. They're not a problem. They're a gift of God. I want to read you the text Pastor Brian sent me. Last night, he sent it this morning. Last night I prayed with a guy named Billy in Guest Center. He just finished serving 18 years. He got out of jail on Friday and was in church on Saturday. He was crying and filled with joy. It was awesome. People like Billy are welcome here. One of the most remarkable things about Jesus was his love for those no one else was willing to love. Jesus touched people that no one else would touch. He talked to people he wasn't supposed to talk to. He forgave people he wasn't supposed to forgive. Jesus didn't see them as useless. He knew what was in their heart, and he knew what they could be through God's grace. And I wonder, what would it look like if we did the same? If we intentionally target the people no one else loves or wants and introduce them to the love of God. See, there are people that every church is competing for. The good people, the wonderful people, they're already finished products. They're going to give a lot of money. Everyone's competing for them, so let's not enter the competition. Let's go for the people no one else wants. When I first became pastor, I started walking through the sanctuary praying, Lord, send us the worst people in our city. Send us the drug addicts and the alcoholics. Send us the abused and the abusers. Send us the worst people and enlarge our capacity to love. You know what that means? You're the answer to my prayers. Isn't that awesome? You are. I want you to be like Matthew. I want you to think of the worst people you know and invite them to church. You say, Pastor Rod, you don't know what they're going to look like. I don't care what they look like. I can't see them anyway with those lights. They're just faceless blobs like the rest of you. Bring them. Well, they've never been in church. I'm afraid what they might do. We'll figure it out. We have all kinds of wacky stuff that happens. That's not going to be a surprise. We should relentlessly share the message of Jesus' love demonstrated on the cross.
What an incredible service. Thank you for joining us and being a part of our church family. If you have any questions about today's service, if you need prayer, or if you just want to learn more about First and LR, go to firstandlr.com or follow us on social media at First and LR. Our goal is for you to be a lifelong follower of Jesus. And I pray that the Lord would bless and guide you as you obediently follow what He has for you and your family. We look forward to connecting with you.